Jeff Hoelle, alumni of Central High School and some other schools, who has done some things, travel, studies, research in parts of our world that most people only read about in National Geographic. Is that a good summary?
Yeah. That's good.
Well, you are here visiting family, and we got this little window to interview you. I started communicating with you after seeing your articles in the San Angelo newspaper that you sent in about every 2 weeks while you were in the Amazon
Yeah, just the Amazon, yeah.
Yeah, wow. And it absolutely thrilled me that a young West Texas fine alumni of our school district was off doing great things. And here you are, and thank you.
No, thank you for having me.
Well, Jeff, you are, you've been gone from our city for a while.
Right.
Go back, and you said you came here in third grade.
In third grade, we moved here from Odessa.
And
I went to Santa Rita.
Okay.
And then Glenn, and then Central.
And when you finished, you were on the baseball team at
Right.
Central. Anything else you were involved in really there?
No, just baseball, pretty much.
Okay. And you went where to do your undergraduate work?
Southwestern in Georgetown.
Absolutely outstanding liberal arts school.
Yeah, I liked it a lot.
Yeah, I've had several bright students go to Southwestern, and then you went to the University of Texas for your master's. What was your undergraduate degree in?
It was in psychology and Spanish.
And then, did you go straight to UT?
No, I was in the Peace Corps for 3 years in Panama after that.
And why did you decide to do that?
I don't know, it's something that I'd always been interested in since I was a young child, been interested in seeing something new. And the good thing about the Peace Corps is that it's also, the idea is to at least try and help out as you're living in another place. So it's something I'd always wanted to do, and it was my dream to do as soon as I graduated.
You know, I don't think that is thought of as often by young people nowadays as perhaps in years, decades ago. Did you get to choose where you went?
No, based on the language you speak, the skills you have, they place you somewhere.
So your skills, besides you had a degree in Spanish, what skills did they match you with for Panama?
They asked me if I had ever had a garden bigger than 5 by 8 feet or something, so I qualified for agriculture. And so I was sent to Panama to do agriculture.
3 years.
Right.
During that time, did you get to come home?
Yeah, I came home every Christmas.
And did you have an adjustment from living in conditions that are mostly without when you came home and you had running water and electricity?
Yeah, it was quite an adjustment back then. I just because I didn't have water or electricity or many of the conveniences we have here. So first of all, I was so happy to be home and to be comfortable. But then it's also a bit troubling to see how much people have and how much is wasted, especially during the holidays, and how there are people that do have a great deal and others that don't. So it wasn't just a culture shock in terms of getting used to the cold or something like that. It was also seeing these differences between people and how much we have here and other people don't have here, and especially those people that I was working with in Panama don't have.
So you finished that 3-year commitment.
Right.
And you came back and went to grad school.
Right, I went to UT.
In what?
In Latin American Studies.
You were hooked.
Yes, after that I really wanted to find a way not just to get back to other parts of the world, but also to try and understand them better. Because I assumed going to Peace Corps I would be able to solve problems and in some way better the lives of those people. But the problems are very complex and related to broader political issues and history and things that I needed to really learn how to research and analyze, and that's why I wanted to go to graduate school after that.
So you got your master's.
Right.
And then what did you do?
Then I went to the University of Florida, where I started in 2006, and I'm about to graduate with my PhD this year.
Now you're leaving out a stint in the Amazon.
Yeah. Well, the Amazon it's my PhD research. So I go to the Amazon, and what the things I was writing back in those articles about, that's related to the research I was doing, which will end up in my dissertation. And dissertations have really long titles, but tell us what it's about. It's about essentially the expansion of cattle ranching in the Amazon. Why is it that as Brazil has become the world's leading exporter of beef, the majority of that growth has taken place in the Amazon? And so obviously when you think of the Amazon, you think of the forest and the biodiversity. So the fact that the majority of that cattle ranching is happening in the Amazon, you have a lot of conflict surrounding cattle ranching. So my objective is to understand why it is that people, first of all, want to adopt cattle. And the answer is that it makes complete sense economically. The forest doesn't really have a direct economic value for those people living there. It does to us as we see the beautiful pictures and think about global warming and these sorts of issues. But on a day-to-day basis, they need to make a living, and cattle are the best way to do that. So it's studying that expansion from the perspective of those people there. But the fun part about it is also studying the way that they're becoming cowboys, wearing boots, belt buckles. I've even seen snuff sold down there. They call themselves cowboys. It's just the cowboy in Portuguese. They listen to country music. So it is an anthropological study. It's seeing these connections and how people with different histories and cultures are adopting some of not only cattle ranching but also the culture of the cowboy.
Some of the articles that I read that you posted, which were incredibly intriguing, and it was obvious to me that you were very much interested in the human dimension.
Right.
And you've already said that even in Panama, the very complex issues that are present particularly in third world country, which I'm not sure Brazil, much of Brazil is considered a third world. Is it?
Well, Brazil as a country, it's emerging, and you have areas that are like the nicer parts of the United States, but the Amazon is another animal altogether. It's more isolated than anything. We can't compare it to even like the Appalachian states or anything like that. It's very separated and isolated. So although Brazil is becoming a world power, it has these areas that are more isolated and wouldn't be part of that first world. It would be considered more third world, I suppose.
So is it fair to say that your study had somewhere at its core economic development versus sustainability of their natural resources?
That's a huge part of this because when I went into the Peace Corps, I wanted to help the people, first of all, to improve their lives through producing better food, more nutritious food. But I began to see that tension between, in order to do that, you have to cut down the forest. And so this research really builds on that, because the Amazon is the center, internationally throughout the world, people focus on it as a forest, but there's these people there, particularly the rubber tappers, the people who provided the U.S. with rubber during World War II, that have they don't have to cut down the forest to make a living, at least historically. So they were tapping rubber, they were gathering Brazil nuts. And so the state where I work, it's called Acre, became a place where it was thought that environmental conservation or sustainability had been sort of reconciled with economic development. It wasn't, in order to succeed economically, you need to cut down the forest, or if you want to save the forest, you have to leave it alone. it was an area where the rubber tappers had said, this is a new way of doing things where we can have a good life and preserve the forest. And so this state of Acre is held out as an example of potential sustainability. But the problem now is that many of those rubber tappers are adopting cattle ranching. And so because rubber doesn't have a market anymore, and that of course is related to broader issues of who buys rubber, synthetic rubber, maybe people here buying it or not buying it, it affects the people chopping down that forest or not. So
before this interview, I briefly told you about a life-changing experience for me and some of my former students of when we studied in Belize, in interior Belize. And while we were there on one trip, the graduate students picketed to stop the bulldozers from tearing down the rainforest, and the bulldozers were owned by Coca-Cola. And they were wanting, as an economic development, to help very poor interior, the folks that lived in the interior of Central America, be able to plant a cash crop of citrus.
Right.
And yet, an American company was funding this, had bought the land actually.
Right.
Many thousand acres. And American research students like yourself were blocking the bulldozers. And I felt like the high school students who were with us got their first taste of this struggle, very complicated struggle between a group of people trying their best to provide for their families, and yet it would mean chopping down hundreds of thousands of acres of trees.
Right.
And the adjustment. Do you see other countries like America going into places like Brazil? Are they there too, as well as in Central America, trying to help and also make a buck?
Yes, you see that. And that's the thing I tried to bring out in those articles, is that when we think about places like the Amazon or Americans abroad, it's always they're good or they're bad. But
yes,
what I tried to show is that there's always two sides, and the more you study things, the less black and white things get, and the more difficult it is to actually take a stand, as those students were doing, because it's more likely that if they were acting in the interests of those people wanted those jobs.
Yes, and needed those jobs.
And needed those jobs more than perhaps a romantic, idealistic student who's going to eventually go back to their comfortable home in the United States. So it's very complicated. But
you are close now. When do you see the graduation for your PhD?
I'll finish in May.
And then you hope to teach?
Yes, I hope to teach and continue to work in these more applied projects, because my research it has the intention of hopefully better understanding why people are adopting cattle, but also what cattle does for them that the standing forest can't. And with this knowledge, hopefully trying to figure out better policies or better ways to help them.
So you envision perhaps taking graduate students to continue research as you have had the opportunity
I'd love to do that, yeah.
Don't you, let's go back one step to your Peace Corps experience.
Okay.
You hoped, you said, to go and help. You were chosen, matched up because of helping with gardening, and you could speak their language.
Right.
I would predict that you also, over those 3 years, showed them an American who cared.
Yeah, some people say that's the most important thing the Peace Corps does.
I think it's certainly one of the major tenets, as well as teaching skills. It helps them to see another side of America, not just as a dominating power or a power. When you take grad students, hopefully, I would imagine you would, besides helping them in their research, because our research for a PhD study is one little dot usually in some bigger research that's
Right.
going on.
That most people will never read or anything about.
I'm sure mine has not been read. But you want, again, just like in the Peace Corps, if you plan to have applied research going on site to another country, perhaps, you will be modeling, my bet is, interaction with people, not to inflict our ways.
No, that's the opposite of what anthropology attempts to do.
And how do you do that?
Well, that's why I have to spend so much time in these places, because in order to understand someone's perspective, you need to live like them. And that doesn't mean coming in and giving a survey and then going back to your hotel. That's why I lived, in the forest with the people. And only through that do I truly understand the conflict that they feel about chopping down trees or adopting a cow, or the fact that you can sell a cow when your child is going to die, and you otherwise wouldn't have that money because you have no bank, or because you raise a crop that's perishable, but that the cow does have that it's able to preserve wealth, and you can sell it at any time. And just sitting around and talking with people and understanding their perceptions, as you mentioned, of the United States, and explaining things to them. It's essential. And most of my time is not doing research. It's sitting on the ground, on the floor with them. Generally, they're making fun of me, or we're making fun of each other, or just having a good time, essentially. But showing them that I care, but also attempting to get at really what is their perspective. Walk a mile in their shoes, and go out and tap rubber with them, or vaccinate the cattle with them, because it's not just actually doing what they do is another step in actually beginning to understand their daily life and their outlook on the world. And so that's the key to really setting aside your own viewpoint and attempting to understand theirs, is doing what they do. And so that's the foundation of anthropology field work.
So you mentioned adopting a cow. Talk to me about what that means.
Basically acquiring your first cow. The move, that's one of the components as I study. When do people actually begin to adopt? When would they first get their first cow?
Buy the cow?
Buy or trade or barter or.
So it's not adopt like we would consider adopt.
No, that's a weird word I used. I mean buy, because they don't always buy them, but acquire their first cow.
Okay. So if you don't buy it, how do you acquire it?
You trade. Rubber, or different agreements. People can graze on your pasture, and then you keep the offspring. There's different arrangements where you don't exactly pay. You have been through some experiences that, quite honestly, not a very small percentage of Americans get to even choose to experience. How do you think, is it possible to list some ways that you are not the same young man that you were even not just as a high school student, but as a college student? I think the main thing, and it's really brought home to me, being home over Christmas, is I was overly critical of everything in my hometown, the United States, everything before I left. And that made me want to see other parts of the world. And I'm still critical in a healthy way about things. But what I do now is I appreciate everything that I have. And for example, school, we always had all the supplies we needed. We had teachers who were there for us after hours if need be, who authentically cared about us. And they were also supported to the extent that they were able to do that because they had heat or cooling in the building. They had erasers and things like that I really, really appreciate, and that I would have never had a respect for before I went. So it's and just coming home to West Texas and there's just things here that you can't, you have to have been away to appreciate them. Just the beauty of the landscape, which is pretty sparse, compared to the Amazon. And I'm always looking for birds and bugs to slap away, but there's nothing here, But I think the biggest thing is just, before I went, I had a lot of ideas and I had my opinions. But going away helps you test them and helps you see what's important. It helps you appreciate your family, the place you come from, and things you never, like school. I never knew that I would appreciate all the things that I had until I had seen those children in the forest in a one-room school with no pencils and the difficulties that I encountered having to cross rivers to get to school and not being able to go to school when it rained. These sorts of things that I feel very fortunate about now.
So is it fair to say that you hope to instill in your students not only a body of knowledge and skills as a researcher, but what other global citizen thoughts when you were fortunate enough to have your first class of students? Would you, and I'm interrupting myself as I sometimes do, would you start out more with undergraduates or graduate students, would you predict?
I think it's essential to work. They're different. They're different, but
well, look how different you are
right.
as an undergraduate at Southwestern
right.
and then post Peace Corps.
Right. No, every experience changes you, and I think that if I were teaching undergraduates, it would just be to encourage them to try and get them interested in anthropology and other cultures and see that there is more out there, and just not really to teach them much beyond that, but to encourage them and facilitate in some way for them to get away and see that. And then after that, they'd probably be hooked, and then as a graduate student, it'd be more developing those interests and emphasizing to them that, which they would, I'm sure, come to realize that academic research should never be divorced from, a concern with improving, not just understanding the world, but also attempting to improve it in some way.
Do you think that you were able to go at some point and be invisible in the respect that you weren't cramming your beliefs down over or down on Native folks? At what point, even in your Peace Corps, were you able to go as a guest and not be so, your thinking colored by your upbringing, that you were a guest in their country?
I think that takes a while, years maybe, for them to truly accept you and for you to not. But the truth is, I'll never stop to some extent judging them from where I come from, because that's who I am. And there are things that I respect as an anthropologist, as an objective scientist, we could say, but it's difficult to see the way that some things occur in different societies, and I don't agree with those. But and sometimes you can't just observe and not do anything. That wouldn't be right with what I consider to be right. Can
you give me an example?
They're pretty sticky situations. I mean, just with family matters, between relationships between people, perhaps violence, things where you can. You're in a situation where it's just impossible not to do something, but you always have to really weigh your options. And so there's some real moral quandaries that come up, when you're in the field. It's not always just I'm out in the forest seeing monkeys and everything's happy. There's conflict between people, and that's the problem they let you into their lives. And so you see some of the things that they're struggling with, and some of the things that the first step in the Peace Corps that was difficult for me was discovering that there isn't a universal morality.
There isn't?
There is not. Or perhaps I should say that what I thought to be universal in terms of right and wrong were not. as a whole, some societies don't view things that way, and then there are individuals who everyone might say is doing something wrong, but because there is no policeman or jail, then there's not really a way to resolve that in a way that I would find suitable. So these shades of gray really, you really have to deal with them.
Was there someone when you were beginning your time in Panama as a 22-year-old, approximately, who could help you put some of that in perspective, that about the differences in what you grew up feeling were right and wrong? Who helped you sort those things out? Well,
we go through some training, but you're out there on your own after that. So you really have to get that, and that's the next step. Is it's not just about sitting there, philosophizing about, is this right or wrong, and chewing on a blade of grass. Actually, what I guess you really drew out the next step is actually deciding for yourself how to react and how to behave and who you are as a person, because it's not just what you think, it's how you behave in those situations. And
maybe re-examining your prior concepts of right and wrong.
Right. It's a matter of thinking about what you think is right and what's happening, but then I think that's the key step that I wouldn't have mentioned, but you reminded me, is how you behave, how you respond is perhaps what the Peace Corps gives you more than anything. Is not just exposure to that, but as a person, you react and you become a stronger person. Although it's not like this is right and this is wrong, but you have to straddle, or you have to figure out what is right for the situation. And I think perhaps if the Peace Corps gives the people, the view of an American as a down-to-earth person who's not seeking to buy the world or whatever their perceptions are, it perhaps gives the Peace Corps volunteer more, in that you become a person that can handle a lot of difficult situations. And in the same hand, not much bothers me anymore, because I know that I'm not dealing with a lot of the difficult questions that a lot of people have to. My life's quite nice compared to them, although we all have our difficulties.
Well, you used the word a minute ago about judging. Just in this brief period of our chatting, I'm not so sure that you are that judgmental. Are you really now?
No, I don't think so, but I think I can't also say that I don't judge. I'm not a judgmental person in a negative way, but as humans, we're always making snap decisions, and we're always, to some extent, classifying people or judging them, or I'm not judgmental at all, but that's the word I chose to use, just to kind of express the fact that we do come in with our own perceptions, our own way of thinking about the world, and that's what's challenged. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing, is maybe I'm saying that now, but I didn't realize that I had any of those preconceptions until I was put into some of those situations. Because until you actually have to bring those out, or someone confronts you, or a situation does, it's pretty easy to say, no, I'm not judgmental. I think that those experiences help you to understand that.
Did you ever want to quit and come home when you were the 3 years in Panama?
Everyone does, every day. There's beautiful days and there's beautiful weeks and perhaps a beautiful month, but there's also days where it rains for 3 days and you don't leave your house, and all you have are some old books you've read 20 times, and it's a bummer. Or when you get sick, or when you feel a lack of privacy, because you really don't have much privacy, at least in the village where I live. Or you just get lonely, you listen to a country song or something, and you just have a loneliness that not much can soothe or make you feel better about. But yeah, I wasn't going to quit unless I got badly hurt, but I thought about how nice it'd be to be home every day. Yeah.
Well, you have absolutely inspired me, especially at this season of the year where we are giving and receiving, to think about those who live so very differently. And even in our city, even particularly since you've been gone, which is a decade or so. Is it approximately since you left? When did you finish?
I graduated in 1995.
Okay, 15 years.
Yeah.
How different we have more especially with the economic toughness in our world. But we have more and more children struggling. So we have a lot of need here, but even in our lot of need, you have experienced the Panama and Brazil much more needs, I would imagine. So I am inspired to not take for granted how blessed we are here in San Angelo.
Yeah. Well,
if you could go back to Jeff Hoelle 15 years ago and open your eyes to one thing, how would you be different as a junior or a senior pitcher on the baseball team?
I might have tried to behave better knowing I'd have an interview with the superintendent
15 years later.
Yeah, because I had my difficulties in grade school and in high school. But I don't know if I could say anything, because I wouldn't be anything today if I hadn't experienced those things. And I wasn't listening to anyone at that point anyway, even if it was me from the future. I needed to experience it myself. So it would just be to do what you're going to do. But I guess I already had the feeling then that I needed to keep going, even if it was difficult, that this is something I need to do for myself. And so in some ways I already had someone guiding me, I suppose, that has helped me get through all these. Really, they are challenging at times, but truly I'm very privileged and fortunate to have these adventures and experiences. And that's why I wanted to write the articles, is to not just to share the experience, but also to show people that the Amazon is not just monkeys and big trees. People live there. People struggle. People who cut down the trees are not evil. They do it because instead of buying some steaks from the store, they have to raise that cow, and to do that, they have to chop down a tree. So to show these, I really feel fortunate that I was able to share those, and that you got to read them, and other people did too.
Well, you took time, and it truly blessed me. I know others as well. And you finish in a very short period of time. Are you applying to universities?
I'm good, because my wife, we're moving to Denver for her job, so I'm already set up to teach at a couple of the universities there, at least in an adjunct capacity, until we move on, where I'll probably be somewhere permanently, but we'll see. Hopefully back in Texas somewhere. Well,
I would love to have the opportunity to interview you after you have your students and are getting them prepared to go, their mindset, not just a body of knowledge about your research, but of the cultures where you're taking them. Thank you, Jeff, for taking time during a holiday season to come and give us a little more insight than you gave us through your articles. Sure. It has been a sheer pleasure having you.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate you everyone coming on the holidays.
Well, really thank you so much.
Thank you.